Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. There are days in everyone's life that divide life into before and after. In Kelly's fabulous and happy life, there had never been a day like this. She was her parents' only daughter, never denied anything. When a young girl at the age of 18 decided to marry her classmate, her parents were not against it. Her father had a manly conversation with his future son-in-law, explaining what would happen to him if he offended their delicate flower. The wedding was played by the whole village, and the best girlfriend caught the bride's bouquet, which meant her soon to be married. The young people decided to stay in their native village. But the girl's parents, tired of the harsh rural life, moved closer to the sea. The health of both parents improved considerably, and the young family spent every summer in their home by the sea. It seemed that life never tired of presenting pleasant surprises. "Lucky you," said her best friend at Kelly's wedding, the favorite daughter of her parents, the most enviable, handsome man for a husband. "Don't worry about it. There will be a holiday on your street too. You didn't catch the bride's bouquet for nothing." Kelly really felt the happiest that day, anticipating that the rest of her life would be full of even more pleasant surprises. Surprisingly, the young bully made an excellent husband, kind, caring, and attentive. Despite his reputation as a slacker, he was able to achieve a lot and did not stop there. After a few years of life together, the young couple had a beautiful daughter, a copy of her mother, and the husband was beyond joy. He carried his wife and daughter in his arms, tried to earn more, so that his girls did not know the lack of anything. "My favorite girls should have the best," he said, buying the most expensive strollers and cribe. The little girl was never denied anything, just like her mother, but she grew up to be an obedient and unspoiled girl. Gradually, Kelly got used to the fact that her husband spent most of the day at work. They did become quite wealthy within a very short time, buying their own house and fixing it up. Kelly didn't work and devoted all her time to raising her young daughter and taking care of her home and husband. She took her daughter to daily developmental activities, while her husband was usually at work. One day, her daughter forgot her exercise books, and Kelly had to go back and get them right away. I was surprised when she walked into the hallway and found her husband's shoes and women's things scattered everywhere. There were unmistakable noises coming from the room, indicating that her husband was having a wonderful time in the absence of his beloved girls. Kelly entered the room in a semi-conscious state. The couple didn't even notice her presence. So engrossed were they with each other. The purse fell out of her trembling hands, making a loud sound from its collision with the floor. This sound managed to attract the husband. He saw his wife at the door and instantly changed his face. He jumped up from the bed. In his hurriedly incoherent babble, she could barely make out a few words of justification. "Kelly, it's not what you think. I can explain. It's not worth it." The girl didn't even want to listen to his pathetic attempts to justify herself. In that moment of anger, Kelly felt such a powerful rush of strength that, grabbing her purse, she rushed to her daughter's room to gather her things. Her husband quickly escorted his sweetheart out and tried to explain something to his spouse. "Kelly, let's talk and talk calmly." It was a passing infatuation, the madman. She could barely hear him, throwing the essentials for herself and the girl into her suitcase as she went. She could no longer stay under the same roof as this monster. "Free my house from you and your woman." After packing her things, she ran out of the house and rushed after her daughter, determined to get as far away from the traitor as possible. The only place where she would be accepted without question was her parents' house. "Daughter, we're going to Grandma and Grandpa's today." "Oh, that's great. Is Daddy going with us too?" "Daddy doesn't have a case. He has to stay home." "That's a pity, and I wanted it all together like in the summer." The girl loved her father very much and took his constant absence hard. "And maybe Daddy will come to visit us at sea later?" "No, baby. Daddy's got a lot to do. But we'll stay at Grandpa's until the summer. Cheers! At the mention of the sea, the girl forgot everything. Fortunately, the bus to the city did not have to wait long, and after an hour she stood in line at the international ticket office. The number of people at the station exceeded all imaginable norms. Noise, crowds, conversations, flight announcements merged in her, shocked by the latest events in her head, into a single incessant hum, like the sound of a flying airplane. The line moved terribly slowly. Her daughter became fretful and asked to walk around the station for a while. "Mommy, can I take a little walk? I'm so hot and my feet are so tired. You see, all the seats are taken, so you'll have to be patient for a while. But then we'll be sitting for a very, very long time, and you can rest." "Well, Mommy, can I at least walk?" It was very difficult for Kelly. Knowing that she could lose things or money in such a state, she tried not to wallow in sad thoughts, but she was afraid to let go of her daughter's hand. It's easy for an adult to get lost in such a crowd, but when it was her turn, Kelly had to let go of her daughter's hand to get her passport and money. It all happened so fast that the girl didn't even notice the exact moment the girl was out of sight. "Baby, please hold on to your mother. I need to buy a ticket." The cashier was an uncommonly unpleasant woman, and she was totally unwilling to step into Kelly's shoes and look for tickets to the next bus. During the conversation, Kelly realized that her daughter had mingled with the crowd. Kelly, dropping her bags, rushed out to find the child. The woman ran the entire station, peering into the most secluded corners. She ran outside several times, asked for help from the police officer on duty at the train station, who asked the train station staff to announce the missing child over the speakerphone. He also offered to go to the police if the child is not found, and he also reminded them that the mother's and child's documents are required for the application. If you can't find your child's documents, they won't take your statement. Yes, and you can be detained until your identity is verified. You can't prove you're related to the girl. Kelly missed that remark and regretted it very much. Only 2 hours later, she remembered that she had left her bags of documents, belongings and money at the cash register. Naturally, they were not where she had left them, and of course no one saw anything and could not say who had taken them. The flow of people was constantly changing, but there weren't fewer people, and the checkout attendants were too busy to keep track of the items left behind. Kelly decided to ask the station's security staff to look at the security tapes. That way, both her daughter's missing and stolen bags could be tracked. But her request was denied. Amidst the stress of her husband's betrayal and her missing child, the girl attacked the security guard with her fists. "You have to help me. My child is missing, and you don't want to help. Who are you after that? My little girl might have already been taken by some psychopath or run over by a car or frozen to death." "Young lady, calm down." The indifferent guard tried not to react to the rampaging mother. "Not only will I not calm down, I will drag you through the courts." With that, Kelly swung around and slapped the man in the face. However, her great height difference prevented her from reaching his face, and the blow fell on his hand. His partner called the police, and they took the distraught woman to the nearest police station for further investigation. When the police arrived, they did not take kindly to her, deciding that she was just another mad woman, rudely shoved her into a cell and left, not even giving her a chance to talk about the reason for her behavior. "You have no right to detain me. My daughter is missing. You have to help me find her." The last words were drowned in a torrent of sobs. Powerlessness, fear for the baby, and despair streamed from her eyes, mixed with an obsessive plea for help to get her baby back. Kelly hadn't slept a wink all night. The events of the day had utterly robbed her of her willpower to live. She went over in her head hundreds of options where her child might be, and each new version was scarier than the last. By morning she hardly knew what was real and what was real, and what was a figment of her fevered imagination. After sitting in her cell for almost a day, she was finally able to pull herself together and ask the guards to invite an investigator. Can I talk to the investigator and explain the reason for my behavior? Did you throw your fists at him too? The officer on duty wasn't trying to hurt or provoke her. He had realized in a few hours that this girl was definitely not crazy, and she needed help, but without guidance from his superiors, he couldn't do anything. Henry, if you don't mind going to the cell, there's a detainee there who wants to talk to you. The officer on duty looked into the office of the investigator who had just come to work. What's that? Is it a nocturnal butterfly? No. She seems fine. She said something about a kid. She tried to punch a security guard at the train station in the face, but she was 5 feet tall. She's so desperate. Come with me, or she'll attack me too. The men laughed and went to the cell. She tried to pull herself together and calm down, to calmly state the essence of her problem. She needed help, and she was going to get it by all means. The investigator, a fairly young man, listened carefully to her story without interrupting, occasionally asking short, clarifying questions and making notes in his notebook. When she was finished, he helped her draw up a report of a missing child and the theft of her belongings, documents, and money. She noted to herself that in the last 24 hours, this investigator and the duty officer were the only ones who had not listened to her and been rude and had not considered her crazy. She could even notice his tired eyes, the graying that was beginning to appear in his temples, and the absence of a wedding ring on his finger, and he couldn't have been more than 35, she thought. I don't dare hold you up. You can go home as soon as we know something and we'll let you know. I don't think you can do it. My phone is still in my purse, and I don't have the money to buy a new one. Leave the number of relatives or acquaintances. I have to contact you somehow if there is any news. There was genuine concern in the man's voice. I'll come here myself in the morning, and I'll come here every day until there's some information about Stephanie. After taking the statement, the investigator released Kelly, as he had no serious reason to hold her. A unit called to the station detained her to verify her identity. Now everything was cleared up and she was free to go on her way. Only problem was, she had absolutely nowhere to go. The small town she sometimes visited on business met her coldly. There were no acquaintances to whom she could ask for a couple of days. She was not going back to her husband, and she could not go to her parents without a child. There was no way to even call and ask for help. Her phone was left in her bag, which was stolen at the cash register. After wandering around the city until dusk, Kelly decided to go back to the train station and spend the night there. Staying outside in the freezing cold would not have been the best decision, but at least the train station was human and warm. At that moment, she was struck again by the horror of the fact that her little girl might be freezing somewhere in a snowdrift now, and that she could do nothing to help her. Tears of despair poured down her cheeks, but the girl no longer tried to stop or wipe them away. The cold pierced her bones, and she remembered that she hadn't eaten anything in over 24 hours. The last time had been early in the morning before class. It seemed like an eternity since then, amazingly. But in all that time, she had never once thought of her husband or his disgusting act. Anger, and then fear for her daughter and despair supplanted the memory of the betrayal of the once dear and beloved man. All her thoughts now were only about her daughter. Where could the child go? It wasn't like she'd fallen through the earth. Kelly kept the hope deep in her heart that the girl had been found, that kind people had taken her in or turned to the police and were now actively looking for the baby's mother, and her baby girl was warmly fed in the company of kind people. I did not at all want to think that my daughter could run out onto the roadway or fall into the hands of homeless people, gypsies, or inadequate pedophiles. At that moment, the girl hated the whole world, which could pose a threat to the only meaning of her life. She walked without raising her head, and suddenly something made her turn into the courtyard of the house. She didn't know why, but she walked around the house and along a small square with a row of benches next to it. It was dark outside, and she wasn't planning on going into the alley. There wasn't much chance of someone popping out of the darkness. Her parents had firmly planted in her head that she should be wary of anything and everyone. You'd be safer. Too bad she hadn't instilled that simple truth in her child. If she had, Stephanie would be with her now, and she would probably be at her parents' house by now. But what made her go that way? It was as if her feet were carrying her forward. Ahead, on one of the benches, she saw a woman's silhouette, an elderly lady slumped against the back of the bench, pressing her hands to her heart. She was clearly ill, and she had no strength and no one to ask for help. Illuminated by the faint light of a lantern and the empty and quiet courtyard. As she came closer, Kelly saw that the woman was as pale as snow, and she tried to rouse the woman and bring her to her senses. "Can you hear me? Woman, answer me. Please let me take you home. What's your address? Do you have your phone with you?" She didn't react for a moment either. Kelly even thought the woman was dead. She couldn't call an ambulance. She didn't have her own phone. Kelly had no choice but to run to the nearest entrance. "Help!" She knocked on all the doors. How strange does her behavior seem? A woman feels sick, call an ambulance right away. Luckily, there were helpful people who lived on the first floor of the house. Not only did the man call an ambulance, but he helped Kelly bring her to her senses. While they waited for the doctors to arrive, the man asked, "Do you know this woman?" The man tried to strike up a conversation to defuse the situation. "No, I just happened to turn into this square. I'm going to the train station." The man glanced around. Walking to the train station at night, you don't look like you're in a hurry to catch a train? "Yes, I have nowhere else to go." "Do you know this woman?" The girl decided to move the conversation so that she would not be pitied, or else she would burst into tears again. And now she should have been thinking about the pensioner lying on the bench. Her face was familiar and alien at the same time. It was as if she'd met someone like her before, but a long time ago, as if Kelly knew this woman, or she reminded her of someone surprisingly close and familiar. "Yes, that's the kindergarten teacher. He's not far from here." The man waved his hand vaguely in the direction of where the kindergarten was located. "Both my sons were in her group." "Good woman." When the doctors arrived, the girl described everything she knew about the woman. How she reacted when they tried to revive her. Kelly had nowhere to go, and there was a reason she found this woman. So she went to accompany her to the hospital. On the way, she asked the doctor about her condition and the prospects that awaited her. It turned out that she had had a heart attack, and if it hadn't been for Kelly, the woman would have died and would hardly have been found until morning. It was late, and people were only walking in that square during the day. Kelly stayed in the hospital until morning. A kind-hearted nurse brought her hot tea and a sandwich, figuring the girl was related to a patient. By morning, she was allowed into her room, the girl who had actually saved her life. The woman did not know how to thank the girl sent to her by fate, but she was very worried that no one knew of her whereabouts. "Daughter, I forgot my phone at home. What if my son finds out that I am here?" The woman didn't seem to care about her own condition at all. She was worried about her son. "I'm going to find the phone." "Do you remember your son's number?" The feeling that the woman was familiar was growing stronger and stronger, especially the gentle, soothing voice, like her mother's. Kelly asked the nurse to give her the phone number to contact the pensioner's son. In general terms, after telling the man what had happened to his mother, Kelly suddenly caught herself thinking that she knew the voice of the speaker. It was strange because she had never seen the old lady before, and she certainly couldn't know her son. What was her surprise when her son, who arrived at the hospital, turned out minutes later to be the same investigator who had taken her missing child report the day before. It really is a small world. "How did you end up in our yard?" The man couldn't seem to believe his own eyes. I don't have anyone in this town to stay outside at night. I decided to go to the train station for the night. But on the way I turned into your square. I don't know why I did that. I guess I had premonition. You seem to have been led there by a guardian angel. The investigator drew his conclusions, realizing that he had to somehow thank the girl, thanks to which his mother escaped imminent death. The investigator involved all his connections in the search for the child. The chances of finding bags, documents, and things, of course, were almost zero. But even here it was necessary to try, and meanwhile he had to decide what to do with the girl. After all, he knew for a fact she had no money, no documents, no belongings, nowhere to live, nowhere to go, and most likely she had not eaten anything for several days. Add to that the loss of the child, the nervous breakdown, and the night in the police. He wondered how she was still on her feet, but the dark circles under her eyes and sunken cheeks gave away everything that had happened to her. Let me at least feed you lunch. You can hardly stand up from fatigue and hunger. The nurse fed me yesterday, thinking that I was somehow related to your mother, because I stayed overnight in the hospital on the couch. I'm sorry, that's not the only reason I stayed here. It's warm and safe, and they might bring my girl to the hospital if they find her. The girl whispered the last words so softly that the man guessed rather than heard them. The first thing he decided to do was to take her to his house, feed her, let her rest and recover, and then to think in what direction to move to help her. On the way, Kelly asked for his phone and decided to call her friend. She needed to decide what to do to find the baby. Obviously, she needed money to do this, so she decided to ask her husband for help since he was the father of her child. Kelly dialed her best friend's number to find out what happened at home after she left. She couldn't talk to her husband. It turned out that not only did he not think to catch up with her or bring her back, he had packed his own bags and moved in with his new party. His mistress turned out to be a secretary in an enterprise where he held a good position. Their relationship had lasted a long time, and many people knew about it. Kelly, who had lost her ideal husband, could not believe it because he was so attentive and caring, even though he was sometimes late at work, returning only at midnight, and even in the morning, because he did everything for the family. It turned out not only for the family. All these months he had managed to support his wife and daughter and his mistress, who was also much older than him. Well, it was even easier that way. There would be no problems with divorce and division of the property he had gained. Everything was registered in Kelly's name. It was her father's strict condition, in case her husband turned out to be a scoundrel. Her father had his eyes peeled. Now Kelly had to sell the house so she could get all her powers involved in the search for her daughter. Finding a buyer wasn't much of a problem. A good quality structure with modern renovations, and a beautiful lot in a picturesque area not far from the city. They were ready to tear it apart with their hands. The problem was that Kelly's papers had been stolen. When she left, she took all of her and her daughter's papers from the house, as well as a small amount of money to settle in with her parents for the first time. A new acquaintance offered to stay in the apartment of a friend who was on an extended business trip while she recovered her documents and searched for her child. The conversation about it came completely out of the blue. In general, it seemed to him that all the events of the last 24 hours resembled a fortunate coincidence. In the morning, he got a call from a friend who was supposed to go on a long business trip and asked him to look after the apartment. The idea did not excite him because he spent almost all his time at work, except for sleep. And here was a whole month to be driven across town, checking the apartment or moving in, leaving his mother alone, and she had been complaining about her heart more and more lately. And now it turned out that he didn't need to look after the apartment, and the girl had a roof over her head, albeit temporarily. The second fortunate coincidence was the girl's appearance in the square where his mother had become ill. That evening she complained several times about feeling unwell and having difficulty breathing. However, instead of resting, she decided to go for a walk in the fresh air. Not having walked a few dozen steps, she felt much worse, so much so that she almost said goodbye to life. And if it were not for Kelly this morning, the man would have met without his mother. Well, the third most fortunate coincidence was the appearance of this girl in his life when he took her application. He realized that he did not want to let her go. She seemed to him an unearthly creature, even as she came to him exhausted, tired. He gave himself a word to help her by all means, to make every effort and connection, but to help her. The man called all the police stations, went to the train station, looked at all the camera tapes. I was afraid to tell her about it so as not to get my hopes up, but he already knew for sure that the girl had left her mother on her own. She had been caught several times in various cameras located all over the station. There was no way to trace her on the street. She must have mingled with the crowd. Kelly's belongings were snatched up by random passers-by and homeless people. Finding anything was almost impossible. Some had left, some had resold it, and some had resold it, and some had simply thrown it away. The loss of belongings and money was to be reconciled, and he set about restoring the documents, while at the same time searching for the child, while he pondered his tactics for further action. Back came Kelly, who was out on the balcony talking to her friend. It was hard to tell from her tense face what was troubling her. She looked like a frightened animal, flinching at every rustle and tense as a string. It seemed that if you touched it, it would jingle. The investigator took her to the office to begin the process of obtaining new documents. In addition to finding the baby and selling the house, she was facing a divorce from her husband, which she clearly wasn't going to put off. Kelly didn't say anything about her husband, except that they left the house with their daughter very hurriedly, literally throwing everything they needed in their bags. The man suggested that the husband was a domestic tyrant, and Kelly was running away from him. In such a situation, it was necessary to act very carefully, because her husband could find her and take revenge, and the disappearance of the child might well be connected with him. But these were only theories that had to be tested, and they did not have much time for that. A small child alone in an unfamiliar city in the winter, not a good combination. As early as the previous morning, after taking a statement, he contacted everyone who could help find the little girl, then called hospitals, hoping that the girl might have been brought there. Fearful of a positive response, he did call even the city morgue, but nowhere was there any information about the child that matched Kelly's daughter's description. The girl seemed to vanish into thin air as soon as she left the train station. Falling asleep in someone else's bed in the evening, Kelly felt even more acutely the weight of the problems that suddenly fell upon her. Especially difficult was how quickly the life that had seemed so perfect in every way could collapse. It turned out that her perfect world was only an illusion, a soap bubble that burst at the first touch. The girl did not doubt her actions for a second, despite the fact that she and her husband had been together for almost 10 years. In an instant he had become a stranger to her. She knew that she would not forgive him even if he returned, would beg for forgiveness. It was his fault she found herself at the train station in this state. It was his fault that the child was missing. In all the days since her departure, her husband had made no attempt to locate or contact her in any way. The investigator helped her restore the number. She was able to contact her parents, but she did not tell them the nightmarish news. She was afraid that her parents' frail health could not withstand such a serious and emotional burden. Instead, she asked them briefly about their health and tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible before her mother asked to put her granddaughter on the phone. They had a little tradition of making up little wishes for each other every day. Most likely her mother suspected something wrong with her daughter's voice, but she didn't ask. Leaving Alina at his friend's apartment, Henry first drove to his mother's hospital and then back to work. For the last few years of his life, work had replaced many things without which an ordinary man could not imagine his existence. From early in the morning until late in the evening, he was either at the department or on the road on business. The only person for whom he could cancel all the work was his mother. She brought him up alone. investing in him all her strength and abilities. He knew nothing about his father. Once when he was a child, he tried to ask, but his mother carefully avoided the subject, and gradually he realized that she did not like such inquiries. Growing up, he tried to put forward theories about who his father was and why he wasn't with him. And when he started working for the police, he even tried to find out something about him through his own channels. But there were no results. He decided that his father could well be a random acquaintance of his mother, about whom there was no data, and therefore it was a useless and hopeless task to look for him. After talking to the hospital doctor, he went to work. The doctor was pleased, saying that my mother was feeling well and was quickly on the mend. In a few days, he could take her home and continue her rehabilitation treatment within her own wall. Mom was not yet aware that her son had found her a wonderful sanatorium that specialized in rehabilitation of patients after heart problems. The conditions there were terrific, but it didn't come cheap either. However, he was not worried about the price. The health of the only family member was 100 times more expensive. The next few days were spent constantly traveling to different organizations. It turned out that acquaintances and connections in our country are sometimes decisive. The process of restoring documents was launched, but the search for the child was much more difficult. Obviously, someone had taken the girl in, or she would have popped up in the crime bulletins long ago. Henry shared these considerations with Kelly, trying to avoid a negative connotation. On the way to work, Henry got a call from his mother telling him she was being discharged today, so he had to change his plans on the fly. He immediately called Kelly, and she gladly agreed to accompany him to the hospital. The girl was very worried about his mother's condition, for some inexplicable force had pushed her into the yard of the house that night. On any other day, she would not have dared to do such a thing. Even during the day, her parents had overprotected and patronized her, telling her what horrors sometimes happened to young girls. And yet that night, hungry and stiff, she decided to listen to her intuition. After picking up the elderly woman from the hospital, they went home. Kelly helped her unpack. Henry got a call from work, and he had to leave immediately for the department. The girl decided not to leave his mother alone. And Patricia, Henry's mother, reminded her very much of her own mother. There was something familiar and painfully familiar about her, like a childhood memory. They spent the day talking, as if they had known each other forever. Patricia didn't look like she had had a heart attack recently. Together with Kelly, they cooked dinner. The woman decided to bake her signature pie, sitting comfortably with a cup of tea and a piece of fragrant pie. At the kitchen table, the women were immersed in memories. Patricia decided to show Kelly the pictures and tell her and her son a little about herself and her son. You know, my Henry's an amazing man, and I don't just sound like a proud mother. He never gave me any reason to be ashamed of him or to worry about him, except one. What's that? I guess there was never a shortage of girls, tired of their attention. On the contrary, for all his positive qualities, my son grew up to be a real man, responsible and decent. He never had any success with women. In his life, he'd had some unfortunate girls or flinging affairs that he never told me about. Interesting, Kelly smiled. I never would have guessed that. He's always so courteous, collected, attentive. She praised the man and suddenly caught herself blushing. She really liked Harry, and Patricia told her young friend the story of her son's unhappy and tragic crushes. There were few of them, but the woman knew how to tell it interestingly, immersing the listener in important details. Henry grew up a very serious and determined boy, played sports, and was a favorite of his teachers. In spite of the fact that his mother raised him alone, he did not give the usual teenage troubles and was not rude and made friends with similarly positive kids. Those around him were frankly jealous of what an obedient and caring son the woman was raising. It went on like that all his life. Henry received higher education, advanced in his career, earned good money, and was in good standing with his superiors. He also gave his mother as much time as he could, but the woman was troubled by his lack of family. Many of his co-worker friends had long been married, but her son had no relationship with the opposite sex. Often the woman sighed, "Sonny, I would love for you to find a worthy spouse. I'm not eternal and I do not want to leave you alone in this world." "Well then, introduce me to your family." The son knew that his mother had grown up in a large family, but he did not understand why they did not communicate. And besides, he absolutely did not want to continue the conversation on this subject and was glad of any opportunity to change it. Back at school, Patricia continued her story. He fell in love with a classmate, but the girl, who grew up in a dysfunctional family, very quickly adopted the addictions of her parents. The woman sighed deeply, regretting the young girl who had no one to take care of her. She was friends with the boys much older than her, and she openly mocked my son's feelings. If it hadn't been for my son, her life would have ended much sooner. The girl who died, Kelly felt truly sorry for the girl, for she was a mother herself. Yes, Henry once saved her life, but still her life was cut short very early. It was Henry who once saved her when her drunken friends thought she had stolen money. Not only did he wrestle her away from this violent company that indiscriminately stabbed the unconscious, half-dead girl, but he was able to get her to the hospital and then take care of her for a long time. Unfortunately, she did not appreciate the act, and sometime later she returned to the same company. The girl did not live to see her high school graduation. She was stabbed to death in another drunken brawl. Henry had not been able to recover from the shock for several years. He was just crushed by grief. He tried not to show emotion, but his mother knew how hard it was for her son. His second serious crush happened when he was at university. This time his lover was a girl who was a few years younger, in the same field of study. She was quite decent, intelligent, well-read, which is how she seemed at first glance. Most importantly, she was the exact opposite of his first love. Attending exhibitions and theaters, she quietly accepted his advances, but she did not allow the relationship to change from friendly to romantic. Henry courted her without insisting on anything, until he learned that the girl was not at all as simple as she seemed at first glance. She was hastily combining her daytime studies at the university with a very lucrative job at night. Once in practice, he was taken with him to apprehend a large underground casino. In addition to the opportunity to tickle the nerves at the card table, visitors were offered the services of girls and illegal substances. Henry did not even immediately recognize his sweetheart. So different was her image from his usual one. She didn't even recognize him that day. "Do you mean to tell me that the university student was a quiet and proper girl who worked as a prostitute?" This was definitely not the turn of events Kelly had expected. "Yes," Patricia continued. "She had very serious patrons. That's why she ignored Henry, and he was even willing to marry her, wooed her for a long time, gave her rare books, and it turned out all she wanted was money, right?" Kelly was shocked. She believed that only the best, the smartest, and the richest went to university. In any case, she did not consider herself worthy of an institution of higher learning, and so she did not regret too much that she had not been educated by marrying early. Continuing the story of Henry's difficult fate, Patricia continued, "Having been finally disappointed in love, he decided that a happy relationship of family, wife. This was not his destiny, and tried to devote all his free time to work. Sometimes, allowing himself to go out into the mountains with friends, I never minded, because he was young and always had many hobbies, but he would not risk his life for no reason either. In fact, life wasn't so bad. Short flings with no strings attached. Not a bad alternative, but it bothered my mother a great deal." Kelly listened breathlessly and without interrupting, as his story was strikingly different from hers. She, used to a life of love, care, and attention, did not understand how she could not get what she wanted in life or make any effort to get it, and her parents loved and pampered her, never limiting her in any way. Falling in love with a classmate, She was sure of reciprocity and therefore decided to get married because she truly, truly loved her husband. Not once in the past 10 years had it occurred to her whether her husband loved her. Did he? Or did he just take advantage of her parents' financial help, which enabled him to get an education? Undoubtedly, he had gone to great lengths to provide his family with a decent standard of living. But then, when they began dating, he was a nobody, and she was the daughter of a respected and wealthy man. Now her husband, though he had left home with a bag of clothes, he was still in a good position. In fact, he wouldn't suffer much from the divorce, and judging by the way he had behaved since Kelly's departure, family occupied very little place in his heart. It was, in fact, the first betrayal and disappointment in Kelly's life. That was probably why it was so painful for her and why she couldn't be in that house anymore. If she had cooled down and looked at the situation soberly, she would not have made a rash, impulsive act and lost her daughter. Immersed in her unhappy thoughts, the girl slowly leafed through the family album, indifferently glancing over the black and white photos and almost not listening to comments Patricia each picture. Was about to close the photo album. She glanced at one photo and froze with an old picture in which even boxes of babies sitting in kindergarten. A blonde, curly-haired girl, in whom Kelly recognized herself, was looking at her. The photo was taken at her first kindergarten matinee. She remembered the day well. A friend of her father's had brought her a stunningly beautiful pink dress from abroad, and she was bathed in the attention of the children and teachers. It was a hard thing to get, but she understood that now, and then she looked like a princess in it. When Kelly's parents lived in the city, a few years later her father was offered a position in the village, as well as a nice house and a company car. Without a moment's hesitation, they moved in. "Patricia, you won't believe it, that girl is me." Alina could not believe such a coincidence. Really? And I wonder who you remind me of, because no one had a dress like that. Yes, I was the most famous person at the party, so to speak, basking in the glory rays. The girl laughed, remembering how flattered she was by the attention of others. What a small world it is. Two women who met under the most amazing circumstances, who instantly found common ground, and, as it would later turn out, with similar destinies, sat together in the same kitchen and shared with each other all the troubles that had fallen on their shoulders. And now it turned out that Patricia was a teacher in the group that Kelly attended. That's where that strange feeling that she had known the woman for a long time came from. At that moment, she remembered that she really didn't want to go to that kindergarten, and only a kind young kindergarten teacher could persuade the girl to let go of her mother's hand and go to the other children. She did not remember her name, but she remembered the remarkable gentleness and kindness that she radiated. Patricia had worked in that kindergarten all her life. Not long ago, she took a well-deserved retirement. Her health problems did not allow her to pay enough attention to the children, and she decided to leave voluntarily. After that, Kelly decided to tell her story. It didn't take long to tell her story because life hadn't been very eventful until recently. After a little silence, the older woman said, "Are you sure you did the right thing?" Sometimes impulsive, rash, ill-considered actions can have terrible consequences. So Patricia told Kelly the story she had kept silent for 30 years, not letting anyone know the details. For some reason, it was now that she wanted to tell it all, to unburden the weight she carried on her heart. Somehow she was sure that Kelly would understand her, not judge her, but support her. She had grown up in a large family and was the oldest. Constant baby cries, diapering lessons with the youngest. The girl was terribly tired and wanted to grow up as soon as possible and go away to study away from parents. Even as a child, she firmly decided that she would not have many children. One is enough, because her parents did not think about the fact that older children should not bring up younger to help. Yes, support, lead by example, but in no case replaced the parents completely. At 15, after finishing 8th grade, Patricia left home to enroll in a teacher training college, and she never returned home. At first, she was gripped by an exciting new life. Then she couldn't get away because of her studies, and eventually she realized that she just didn't want to see any of her family. Plus, she started dating a young man and was going to marry him. She didn't want to introduce him to her parents and numerous brothers and sisters. Her fiancé was from a respectable family, and his parents were not thrilled to become related to a nobody-known village wire, but her husband loved her and did not want to hear anything. Everything changed abruptly after the birth of his son. The constant screaming of the baby, the uncoastal house, and the untended young spouse quickly dispelled all romantic feelings. The husband became rude, aggressive, increasingly snapped at his wife and child, started coming in late, sometimes drunk. One day something clicked in his drunken brain, and he hit his young wife. Patricia flew off into a corner, unconscious for a few minutes. But her husband was not going to calm down, continuing to mock her and smash everything around her. The girl tried to calm him down so that the noise would not frighten the child. But when he wanted to hit the little son, she decided to act decisively and protect the baby. She hit her husband on the head with a stool, and while he was unconscious, she grabbed the child, some things, documents, and ran to the train station. Being around such a man was life-threatening for her and her child's life. She realized that nothing could stop such a man buying a ticket for the first available destination at the ticket office. A few hours later, she and her son found themselves at the train station in an unfamiliar city that had become her home. She did not dare to go to her parents, fearing that her husband would find her there. And why would they need her as a burden, with a baby in their arms? They had enough problems there without her. Patricia decided to start a new life here, and to start it in such a way that her husband could never find her. She went to the police station and reported the loss of her documents. She gave her maiden name and registered her son in the same name. In the new passport, she did not include information about her marriage, and the child's birth certificate had a dash instead of the data about the father. And then there was a long and difficult period. The little son had to be fed, clothed, and raised, and to do this she had to find a job quickly, but one that wouldn't be a problem for the child. Little Henry was only 2 years old at the time. She got a job at a daycare center and put her son in the nursery. There was no place to live, but the manager let them sleep in the back room. At first she worked as a janitor, and then she was offered a position as a nanny. And when her son went to school, Patricia was able to take the position of educator, gradually saving all the money from her salary. She was able to save for a small room in a communal apartment. She was only able to change it for an apartment when her son started earning money. After she finished her story, she looked at her young friend. "Such is my unhappy story," concluded the pensioner, looking at Alina. "But why didn't you reconnect with the family? You didn't allow Henry to communicate with them if you were afraid he would be left all alone." At first I was resentful of my parents, who bore children one after another without thinking about how and on what to raise and educate them. I wanted to get away from them, and then I blamed them for marrying the first man I met. But did they push you to get married? Kelly genuinely didn't understand how she could treat her parents with anything other than boundless love and respect. No, but it was easier for me. It wasn't my fault. It was everyone else's fates and everyone else's, but not mine. And then when your son grew up, he asked you about your father and family. Kelly couldn't stop wondering. Yes, he brought it up a few times, but I tried to change the subject because of the last name. He couldn't find his father. I took my maiden name after I moved, but my many brothers and sisters quite. At first I was afraid to go to them, in case my husband would start looking for me, but then worries and problems swirled me, and I just stopped thinking about them. How they live now, whether they are alive, I do not know. Several times I broke through to tell him everything and ask him to find my relatives, and each time I chickened out, because then I would stop being the kindest and most attentive mother to him. Yes, you will always be the best mother to him. It's up to you to tell him, but you certainly don't have anything to blame yourself for. Kelly took the older woman's hand and squeezed it, transferring some of her strength and confidence to her. Their destinies were similar in some ways, but they had many differences. She left her husband and ran away from him because he posed a real threat to her and the child. But Kelly endangered herself and her daughter because of a simple whim. The house belonged to her. She could go nowhere and simply kick the unfaithful husband out. He had never laid a hand on her or the child. There was no good reason for the girl to flee to the unknown. Still, Patricia felt sorry for Kelly, for sometimes the collapse of the hopes of an ideal world is as painful as moral or physical abuse. At that moment, Kelly's phone rang. Henry asked her to come to the station, saying it was very important and about her daughter. Without listening to him, she rushed to the door as she buttoned her jacket. Without remembering how, she flew a few blocks and ran into the police station where Henry worked, running several corners as she went. Confronted by disgruntled people, she found herself in Henry's office, where a very dirty-dressed girl was sitting quietly in a chair. It was her daughter. It seemed to Alina that the ground had gone out from under her feet. Forgetting everything with joy, she grabbed her little girl and held her tightly to her. Surprisingly, her daughter did not appear haggard, frozen, frightened, or emaciated. Nothing seemed to distinguish her from the child Kelly had lost at the train station a few days ago, except the dirt on her clothes. When the girl recovered a little, she was able to listen to the amazing story of the girl's adventures and her return to her mother. Henry suspected that the girl might have been kidnapped by gypsies or beggars to use her begging work. However, searches in the area of the station yielded no results. No one had seen a similar girl, and then this morning a man who lived on the street came to their office and reported that one of the beggars in their neighborhood had started taking the girl to work with him. Realizing that the child was most likely stolen, he decided to go to the police. Several times he tried to talk to her, to persuade her to return the girl, but she reacted very aggressively, and fearing that she would do something to the girl so that she would not cry, not be capricious, and not ask to go home. Understanding that the girl was in real danger, the homeless man came to the police for help. Apparently, the brain, clouded by the constant drinking, was still able to think and assess the level of danger. Henry and the police officer drove to the place where the beggar with the girl was supposed to be working. He faintly hoped it was Kelly's daughter. They picked up children like that off the street regularly. The woman ran away as soon as she saw the uniformed man, and the trusting girl agreed to go with him without question. He was surprised at this point, since modern children are taught from an early age not to go anywhere with strangers. Apparently, this little girl had not received such lessons, or was by nature too trusting. It was decided to take mother and daughter to the apartment of Henry's friend. But first we had to buy the little girl some clothes. Besides, the girl was very tired and didn't really want to drive her across town to the apartment, and Henry's mother wanted to get to know the little girl. She noticed that her son liked Kelly and decided to make sure they spent as much time together as possible. In the evening, after the girl had showered, eaten, and rested, she finally told her mother everything that had happened to her. "Mommy, I didn't mean to run away from you, but there was a little puppy hiding under the seat, and he was so cute that I couldn't help myself and went to him, and he didn't want to be my friend." The girl was silent for a few minutes. "What happened next?" Mom asked. "If I tell you, I won't be angry." I hesitated a little. Stephanie continued. "Some huge uncle dropped a suitcase next to me, and that loud sound made the puppy freak out and rush to run, and I rushed to run after him. Several times I almost caught up with him, but he still ran away, and when I looked around, there were strange uncles and aunts around. I tried to ask them where you were, but no one heard me. I ran around the station, but I couldn't find you. I got so scared I sat down in a corner and began to cry. Memories came flooding back and tears came to my eyes. Kelly cradled her daughter in her arms, trying to calm her down. What happened next? And then my grandmother came up to me. She gave me candy and asked me why I was crying. Apparently, this moment was the most pleasant for the girl. My grandmother said she'd help me find you, but in the meantime I should go with her because you must have already left. She threw an old jacket on me and said it would make me feel warmer. Hearing this, Henry realized why he had only seen the girl on camera footage inside the train station. In the disguised rags, he just did not recognize her. And how many more of these gullible girls are sent to work the streets along with the beggars? Many of them are not searched for because parents do not care what happens to their children. Thank God Kelly's daughter was found and didn't get into trouble. When children like that don't make it on the streets, they are either killed or put on drugs and alcohol. It was frightening to think what consequences that event could have had. Meanwhile, the girl continued her story. My grandmother was very kind. She didn't scold me or hurt me, but I didn't really want to go to the square with her. It was dirty and cold. She also told me to keep quiet so people would think I couldn't talk, but I wanted to read or draw. It was very boring, sitting around all day just telling every passerby to come over. They looked at each other with Henry and he asked, "Did you live alone with your grandmother? Did she have any other girls or boys?" "No. She said she had granddaughters too, but they were taken from her, even though she loved them and took care of them. And now she's always looking for abandoned little children, gathering them up and taking care of them." "Where do they all go?" Henry said. She said they had grown up and lived on their own. Only Stephanie and Patricia slept soundly that evening. Kelly and Henry were sitting in the kitchen, deciding how to move on. The paperwork was in full swing, and soon Kelly could leave for her parents' house, just as she had planned. Now, however, that decision no longer seemed so appealing to her. Why don't you settle down here for a while? Sell the house, finalize the divorce, or make peace with your husband? Henry tried to say the last words in the most indifferent tone, but the girl could not escape the note of hope in his voice. "No, I'm not going to defend him. Besides, he's already in a new relationship. My mother suggested that I get a job in the kindergarten where she worked through an acquaintance. They can take her without documents for the time being. Then you will bring everything." The man wanted to tie Kelly to this town as much as possible and not let her leave. He knew he was in love, and he didn't want to let her go. It would seem that a grown man would tell her how he felt, but he was at a loss, unable to find the words, like a teenager at the time of his first crush. "Kelly, I'll go with you to the kindergarten and talk to the director. Maybe she'll find a place for you too." Patricia also decided to help her son in any way she could. "That would be just wonderful. I can't sit on your neck anymore, and with a baby too." Kelly was indeed very happy to go to work. Having married early, she had been unable to get an education, and her husband had not insisted that she work. The birth of her daughter had finally turned her into a housewife, so now she desperately wanted a change in her life, and a drastic one at that. The kindergarten manager was happy to make the girl an assistant teacher and Stephanie into one of the older groups. The girl was supposed to go to school in the fall, and preparatory classes were clearly not unnecessary for her. Kelly's papers were ready a couple of days later. It's not bad to have such a wonderful acquaintance who pulled all his connections to speed up the process as much as possible, preparing everything necessary. Kelly was about to go to her home village to prepare the house for sale. Besides, she should have informed her husband of the divorce, and she had already filed the papers. But having a child might have delayed the process. Henry volunteered to drive her. He still didn't ask why the girl had left home in such a hurry. "I fear for you. You don't have to worry. You've got a lot of work to do. I'll get there myself. Kelly, let's be honest. I like you. I like you a lot. I can tell you for a fact that I love you, and I don't want to let you go anywhere. Why did you leave your husband? Did he beat you? a little taken aback by the confession and the abrupt change of subject. The girl told the man about that unfortunate day. "But are you sure you can't forgive him?" Henry hoped the answer would be in the affirmative. "I don't think he will apologize for all the time since we left. He hasn't called or written to me, not once, not to me, not to my parents. I have nowhere else to go, and he knows it." In the morning, they drove to the village where Kelly had lived most of her life. Surprisingly, Henry's misgivings about her husband were not so unfounded. He really threw himself at her feet as soon as he saw her. "I begged, I pleaded, I swore on my beloved's eternal love. I didn't know how it happened. That bitch just wouldn't leave me alone. She wanted to get a promotion through me, and I didn't realize it. Thought she was interested in me, but I figured it out. I realized I only love you and Stephanie. You're my favorite girls. Did you know your daughter had been living with homeless people for a week? And I went to jail while I was trying to find her." The girl's voice was surprisingly calm and dispassionate, as if she were talking about someone else. "I thought you were in town with a friend for a few days to cool off and calm down." The falseness in her husband's voice was so obvious that Kelly couldn't even answer him, glaring at him contemptuously. She escorted him out, closed the house, and headed for the car where Henry was waiting for her. Her husband's suitcases were already on the porch. He hoped to the last that his quiet and docile wife would forgive him as soon as he showed himself on the doorstep. At Kelly's request, the locks on the house were changed so that the ex-husband wouldn't think of returning there or bringing another lover into it. She gave up on her past life and went on to a new, happy life. And in this life there was no room for past memories and regrets. Patricia told her son the truth about her father, her parents, and her many relatives. He tried several times to find someone, but each time unsuccessfully. He did not stop trying, but he continued without the enthusiasm, because now he was not alone. He had a faithful, loving, beautiful, and caring wife beside him, and it was worth the trouble to wait for her. He was happy perhaps for the first time in his life, and all the more precious that feeling was.